besides being a musician, a producer, a DJ, you're also a photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think a lot of people know that. I'm sure your fans know that, but not everyone knows that. So you started at a very early age being a photographer, yeah? At 9 years old, am I correct?
Well, my uncle had been a photographer for the New York Times, and so when I was around 10 years old, 10 or 11, he started giving me photo equipment that he wasn't using. And I got really lucky because he gave me really good equipment. Like my first camera was a Nikon F, which is, just a great 35mm film camera. And then when I was around 14 or 15, he gave me darkroom equipment, like an Omega D2 enlarger. And so I grew up shooting film and developing and printing and processing, which I think has definitely, because now most photographers, or a lot of photographers I know grow up just in the digital world, which is fine, but I'm very grateful for the fact that I grew up shooting film, working in dark rooms.
Yes. So you remember your first picture ever?
My first picture, that's a good question. I do remember the first time I shot film and then developed the film, or processed the film myself and then printed, because I went out and bought RC paper, and the first image I printed, at an early age, I was really obsessed with Dadaism and Surrealism.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was around maybe 15 or 16 years old, and I went into the dark room and I printed this image of bananas coming out of the toilet.
Bananas?
Bananas coming out of the toilet. And I have it somewhere. And I think that might be the first thing I ever printed.
Bananas? How did bananas come out?
I put the bananas in the toilet.
You put them in the toilet.
Mm-hmm.
What did you want to express?
That bananas looked strange coming out of the toilet. Like it looked like, to me, like sort of like a photograph that Man Ray would have taken.
Oh, okay. So you mentioned Man Ray. You are your inspirations in photography.
Well, in the world of photography, it's a good question. Honestly, my biggest influence, and I don't see any evidence of this in the work that I do, but my biggest influence is Edward Steichen. Simply because when I was growing up, we were very poor, and my mother and I only had one art book, which was a book of Edward Steichen photographs. And so I grew up just obsessively going through this book, and I think one of the things I loved about his work was, in a lot of early photographers, how diverse it was. Like if you look at his work, like some of the early work in the late 19th century was very impressionistic, very natural landscape pictures, where it was out of focus and very soft, almost like late 19th century French Impressionism. And then he did architectural photography, he did portrait photography, he did still lifes, he did big landscapes, and it was the idea that as a photographer you can take pictures of anything, and you shouldn't be worried so much about trying to work within one specific photo discipline. I mean, even you look at someone like Irving Penn or Cortez, some of the early great photographers, they took pictures of lots of different things, and they used lots of different medium. Sometimes they would shoot in color, sometimes they shoot in black and white. They do large format, medium format, small format. It was a very open, eclectic approach to materials, medium, and subject matter.
Yes.
And then more recently, I love, my biggest inspiration in terms of contemporary photography would be Wolfgang Tillmans. Similarly, he sometimes shoots very formally and sometimes shoots very informally. But I feel like he, and a lot of my favorite photographers, they're not objective. Meaning you really feel the photographer's presence in the image. What I mean is there are a lot of photographers now who make very impressive, very interesting works, but they're very objective. The photographer, the photographer will step back and take a picture of a factory, and it'll feel very clinical. And I'm a little more interested in photographers who really involve themselves in the image and the choice of the image and the perspective, and you really feel their involvement.
So in this day and age, a lot of people take pictures with their cell phones and pictures of everything. Whatever they're looking at something, they take a picture of it. Are you one of these guys, or you just don't go there?
Oh, I love digital photography and everything about it. You know, I mean, it's amazing because like in the 70s and the 80s when I was growing up as a photographer, craft was such a huge part of being a photographer. You know, like understanding your camera, understanding the film, you know, exposure, aperture, shutter speed, mixing your right chemicals, printing, dodging, burning, getting your right contrast and grayscale. Like the craft was such a huge part of it. So when you looked at a print, it represented the image, but it also represented the photographer's skill in the darkroom and with their camera. And now craft means almost nothing, you know, because like I see pictures that people take with their iPhone and they're amazing, like really great pictures. And some photographers find that depressing, but to me there's something just sort of challenging. It becomes that question of like, okay, if everybody can take a good picture, how can I take a picture that still has meaning?
Yes. So it's a challenge for you. You see it as a challenge more than that.
And it's that, I mean, first of all, using like an iPhone will take a great picture, but you'll never be able to blow it up more than like a couple of feet square. But if you take like using like a Canon 5D or a Hasselblad or something, you'll be able to have enough information so you can actually make huge prints with great detail.
Yes.
And so that is one difference between, let's say, like a professional photographer and someone with their iPhone.
Yeah, totally. So what, do you ever take selfies?
Oh yeah.
You do?
Yeah, I mean I have my Instagram account, Richard Melville Hall, it's just one word.
Oh.
I take sometimes very formal pictures and sometimes stupid selfies.
Let's talk about Innocence. That is your upcoming exhibition that is gonna debut here in Los Angeles on the 21st of February. And you talk about this is the documentary evidence of the cult of innocence. Can you expand more on this subject?
Well, part of it is I moved to LA a few years ago, and there is a strangeness to Los Angeles that I really love. And LA, more than any other big city I've ever been to, has an integration of nature that is both beautiful and strange. You know, like most big cities, when you're in the city, you just feel the city. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like when you're in Paris, you're amazed how beautiful Paris is, but the only nature is the Seine, which is this little river boxed in by stuff that men have made.
Yes.
You know, when you're in New York, it's the same thing. It's like, there is no nature. There's weather, but there's no real nature. And
There's
it's beautiful.
Central Park. And
Yeah, Central Park is like, you know, it's a garden, you know, and it's beautiful. And then you come to LA and there's weird, strange nature everywhere. You know, there's 2.5 million acres of state park in Los Angeles. There's the desert just a few miles away that is endless.
Yes.
You know, there's the Pacific Ocean, which is endless. There's these mountains and these hills, and there's a weirdness to nature here. And I feel like somehow there's something very apocalyptic about it. Because like, it's meaning, it's putting, like, okay, this is I know this is going to be a long, strange, rambling answer, because it goes back to the difference between like medieval art and architecture and the Renaissance.
Yes.
And I think the Renaissance was interesting, but ultimately kind of a mistake. Because medieval art and architecture was so interesting because it basically said, here's humans and everything around us is mysterious and terrifying. You know, like when you look at a medieval map, at the edge of the world it says, here there be monsters.
Yes.
Which is so interesting to me. Basically saying like there's this stuff out there, we don't know what it is, and it's mysterious and terrifying. Then the Renaissance came along and put humans at the center of everything.
Yes.
And it was very refined, but kind of boring. like I'd much rather look at like medieval art than Renaissance art. Because Renaissance art, it's pretty, but it's like, it's a picture of a person with like a nice little town in the background, and it's sort of made people start to think that like humans were in control of everything.
Yeah, and nature was just a side.
Yeah, nature was like a pretty thing to sort of like put in a box. And I feel like that kept going, you know, like, and in the 20th century, especially scientifically, it continued to go that way, like with antibiotics, saying like, oh, as humans, we can kill nature when we don't like it. But what we're learning more with, like, with quantum mechanics and even like new bacteria theory is that like nature is big and overwhelming, and we're an integral part of it. And it's an integral part of us. And so I feel like, in a way, this apocalypse is changing the human relationship to nature and almost saying like, the natural world is us.
Yes.
And so that's kind of, I know this is a very long answer, but that's kind of what, one of the inspirations for this show is saying, looking at weird evidence that the natural world is coming to get us again.
Yes.
You know, we've kept it out, and like, and I'd like to keep going with this, because like, I was just looking at the news, every news story now is about the weather, or about bacteria, or about, like, it's basically like, it's nature coming back.
Coming back and taking possession again of its own realm. Yeah.
I mean, it's almost in keeping with my name, Moby, because I'm named after Moby Dick. And in the book Moby Dick, there's Ahab, who represents humanity trying to control nature. You know, and Ahab, it drives him crazy that there's Moby Dick, who he can't control. It makes him literally insane. And he dedicates his entire life to trying to like subdue Moby Dick, who represents chaotic nature.
Yes.
And ultimately Ahab gets killed by it, because you can't. It's like fighting a tsunami. It's like fighting a tidal wave or a hurricane. Like, it's bigger than us.
Yeah.
We can't change it. So the idea for this art show is half of the pictures are pictures of the apocalypse.
Yes.
But I also want it to be ambiguous. Like, I didn't want to have conventional pictures of like pollution or a factory dumping waste somewhere. Like, I wanted to have artistically strange, ambiguous pictures that would almost make people question like whether the apocalypse has happened.
Yes.
And then there's this cult of innocence, and it's basically a cult of people. It's the world's first post-apocalyptic cult, because all cults for the last 1,000, 2,000 years have been pre-apocalyptic. You know, every cult, going back to the early Christians, all said, oh, the apocalypse is about to happen.
Yes.
Even more recent cults, like the Source family cult in the 70s, like they said that the apocalypse is gonna happen. And I thought it'd be interesting to say that the apocalypse has happened, and this cult of innocence is like the first cult after the apocalypse.
Oh, that's very interesting.
And so that's why they're covered up, because they're so ashamed at what humans have done. So they're sort of covering up their humanity.
With masks and robes and white robes, I saw in your pictures, and one of the pictures is the cover of your album, Innocence, your latest album. So you're inspired by LA in this of course, because you moved here. So what inspires you about LA besides nature? Is there anything else that you get inspired from?
Well, the weather, the fact that we can go outside 360 days out of the year. I feel that creates an openness to people. Like, there's just a sort of receptiveness that people have, you know, because when I was living in New York a few years ago, I realized every time in the winter, and this is true for most of the Western world, in the winter, every time I thought about the outdoors, it was an adversarial response. Like, in the middle of February in New York, outdoors was the enemy, you know, and every time I went out, I had to prepare myself to battle, you know, like, you had to make sure that you were dressed appropriately for battle, and you'd walk out the front door, and you'd tense your muscles, and be like, okay, here we go, and you'd walk outside, and it was a fight.
Yes.
And I think there's something interesting about living in a place where you don't fight.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you walk outside, and it's just the world. You know?
Yes.
And the world is so much bigger as a result. Also, what I find inspiring about LA is because it's a new city,
Mm-hmm.
it's a city made by people we understand. Meaning, if I'm in Milan
Yeah.
or Rome, where are you from?
Milan.
Milan. So if
Yeah.
I'm in Milan, I'm amazed by how beautiful it is. And I look at the architecture and I look at the culture, but I don't understand it because it was built by people I don't know.
Yes.
You know, it was built hundreds of years ago. Like if you're in Istanbul, you look around like it's so beautiful, but it was built 1,000 years ago and I don't know what they were thinking of.
Yes.
You
So
know,
you cannot
Paris.
relate as
yeah,
much.
so like, so you look at architectural forms and you're like, wow, that's beautiful, but I don't know what it is. You know, and like, you try and imagine what life was like in Milan or Venice or anywhere 600 years ago,
Yes.
1,000 years ago, and try and imagine what they ate and what their water was like. Whereas LA, like, it was built 50 years ago.
Mhm.
It was built 75 years ago by people who are still alive.
Yes.
You know, so like, there's a newness and a cheapness and a modernness, and not a clean modern. Like a lot of modernism is very clean, you know, glass and steel, and modernism in LA is just a dump. You know,
Mhm.
like LA is kind of like Mexico City in that way, but even less organized, I think.
Yeah.
And there's something about that I find really interesting.
Yes.
That it's, you know, you walk down the street in LA and you're like, wow, what a beautiful or interesting building, and it was made 80 years ago by people who might even still be alive or just died recently, and like, you know, they make music, I make music. They made movies, we make movies. They, you know, it's like it's this, there's a connection to the past here that I
Yes.
feel like you don't get in older cities.
Yes, including this, your guest house, this place was built
Yeah.
by John Lautner.
Yeah, John Lautner built my guest house.
Yes.
And John Lautner, if he was still alive, would be 103 years old.
So still kind of like a decent fair.
And so you can sort of look at it and just feel, I don't know, a strange emotional connection. Like if this house were built in the 13th century,
Yeah.
it'd be beautiful and I would love it, but I wouldn't feel a connection to the people who made it.
Yes.
Whereas John Lautner, like I look at some of the material choices and I'm like, oh, I get it. You know, and I appreciate his playfulness, I appreciate his intellect, his experimentalism.
Yes, you can relate to that. So, music and photography in your, let's say, within your creativity, do you see photography as an emanation, as an expansion of your music, or do you see both as the same part of your creation?
In some ways, one of the reasons why I love taking pictures is because it's completely different from making music. Like the two, it's hard for me to think of two artistic mediums that have less to do with each other. Because, I mean, one is visual, one is auditory. One involves the manipulation of time, and the other has no manipulation of time. You know, like with music, if I play you a song,
Yes.
and the song is 3 minutes long, it will always take you 3 minutes to listen to that song.
Yes.
You know, whereas with a photograph, you can spend 2 seconds looking at it, you can spend an hour looking at it, like it's really up to the viewer.
Yes, it's subjective. The time is subjective
Yeah, it's very subjective. And in music, like every aspect of it is being created by the musician, whereas in photography, I feel like the viewer adds a lot more to it.
Yes.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
You know, like,
interesting what you're
I
saying.
mean, you could do that with music. Like, you could listen to a song from a mile away. You could listen to a song very quietly or very loud. You could really pay attention or not pay attention, but like, people with music just usually turn it on and listen
Yes.
from usually a set distance. Whereas photography, like, you can look at it in a book, you can look at it on the wall, you can really get into it and focus on different details. And the fact that it's so static fascinates me.
Yes.
You know, especially on a more broader, I guess, sort of like semiotic level, the fact that it can trigger such reactions in people when all it is pigment on paper. Like it's just pixels, you know, and it can make people cry, it can make people angry, make people, you look at like the famous picture of like the Vietnamese monk setting himself on fire.
Yes.
Like it has such emotional reaction for people, you know, or like the photographs of like John F. Kennedy being shot.
Yes.
Like it triggers such reactions, and like it's just pixels, you know, it's just like a piece of white paper with little bits of like pigment on it, and I'm just amazed that it can inspire such reactions in people.
So, in your case, are you more flattered when someone says, I love your latest single, or when someone says, oh, I love this picture from Innocence, it's so beautiful?
Probably, I mean, I've been in music, I spent most of my life working on music, so I definitely feel more connected to that.
Yes.
And also the photography that I do has a strangeness to it. So, I try to take pictures that have a quality of beauty to them, but I'd much rather my pictures be strange than beautiful. I'd much rather them be different and a little challenging.
Yes.
Whereas the music I make, I really want to make music that is beautiful and warm and welcoming.
Yes, so your photographs are a little provocative maybe in that sense.
I want them to be a little uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable, yeah.
Even if they have elements of beauty to them, I want them to hopefully make the viewer question things.
Question things,
It's
yeah.
very much, it's up to the viewer what they question.
Yes, for example, this one, I kind of
Yeah.
like this one, which is this
Monkey in the
bean,
supermarket.
yeah, the monkey with the
Yeah.
rope in a supermarket,
Mhm.
yeah. So what do you want to express with this photograph?
As humans, we love contrast.
Yes,
You know, it's almost like our brains, the two things they respond to visually the most, like contrast and movement. And clearly with photography, you can't really have movement because it's a still image, but you can create contrast and juxtaposition. And so it's the idea that you can have really in this, I mean, there are thousands of elements in there, but there's basically just two main compositional elements, which is like the monkey mask and the figure wearing a monkey mask. And so
Yes.
as we respond to individuals, you know, if there's a picture of a huge landscape and in the corner is one tiny little person, our eye goes to the person. It's almost like how as hominids, how we're hardwired.
yes.
So we have the monkey mask figure,
Yes.
and then you have the supermarket, and I just love that it creates this very ambiguous juxtaposition, and it immediately asks the viewer, like, what could possibly be going on?
Yes.
Because no one in their normal life has ever gone to the supermarket and encountered a stoic figure standing in the middle of the toothpaste aisle wearing a monkey mask.
I would love to have such an
Yeah.
encounter. Though.
And the question is like, and there's nothing else going on, so the question is this normal? Is this not normal? Is this threatening? Is this benign?
Yes.
Is this otherworldly?
Yes.
So I really like when art asks questions as opposed to answers questions. I don't think the goal of art should never be to come to conclusions.
Mhm.
I think the goal of art should be to really like raise questions on the part of the viewer.
Yes, more intelligent questions. Yeah, more meaningful questions.
And leaving things ambiguous. Like I get very, I hate to say this because I don't want to criticize, but I get annoyed with art that tries to lead the viewer to a conclusion.
Yeah.
You know, like
To give answers.
if you show me a picture of a boy in India wearing a saffron robe, sitting by the side of the road with a begging bowl, I understand the conclusion the photographer's trying to lead me to. It's like they're trying to say this is spiritual, this is from another culture. I'm like, I know that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I already get it. Like and it's beautiful and it's great that you took that picture. But like, I want to be challenged. Maybe it's why David Lynch is one of my favorite artists, because, you know, like his work, like his movies don't answer questions.
Yes.
You know,
They
like
leave it kind of like to the viewer. They leave
Yeah.
the choice to the viewer.
I
Yeah.
think that's so much, like, I mean, and it's why I like the surrealists and why I like the Dadaists. They'll use conventional narrative compositional elements,
Yes.
but without a conventional resolution.
Yes. So along those lines, do you draw any inspiration from your dreams, or do you have a recurring dream?
I don't. That's a good question. Because a lot of great art has come from people's dreams. I think that the only thing I try to do sometimes is create the effect, like the feeling that you have after a dream, to sort of create that through visual art. Like to create something that's unsettling, that probably wouldn't exist in the real world. And if it does exist in the real world, like that's another beautiful thing about photography is like, if you walk by a gas station, you don't pay attention to it. Like, it's a gas station, we walk by all the time, who cares? But if you're a photographer, you can take a picture of it in such a way that then makes the viewer notice the details in the mundane.
Yes.
That otherwise we would just be, that we're oblivious to. And can sometimes, when it's really effective, like I'll go back to David Lynch, you watched Twin Peaks?
Yes, I did, yeah.
One of my favorite recurring images in Twin Peaks is the camera shooting up the stairs at the Palmer house with the ceiling fan spinning. That's all it was. Like a lockdown camera going up the stairs and a ceiling fan is spinning. It's the most mundane thing in the world, but somehow it felt otherworldly and terrifying. Like you look at this image and be like, why is that so strange? Like it's the genius of David Lynch, for example, is to like take the normal and make it seem frightening, or take the normal and make it seem strange.
Yes, so turning the normal into something abnormal and vice versa.
Yeah. And then we go out into the world, and all of a sudden, hopefully the world looks different to us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we maybe see it a little more, in a more interesting way.
Yes. So going back to your music, so your album was released in October, your Innocence was released in October 2013.
Mm-hmm.
Are you touring right now? Are you...
No, the entire tour was 3 shows at the Fonda Theater.
Oh, okay.
Because I don't like touring. So I do DJ things every now and then, like I'm going to Hawaii to DJ the yoga festival.
Nice.
Because I like Hawaii and I like yoga. But I'm not doing any conventional touring.
Okay.
Like I'm playing a fundraiser here in a couple of weeks for this charity called Global Green. But no, the actual tour was just 3 shows.
Okay. So what do you see in the future of music?
And the future of music is, in many ways, the future of music is identical to the past, which is, like, what's fascinating to me, and this is true with a lot of digital media, like photography. Like if we're looking at a picture that I took 30 years ago and a picture that I took yesterday, and we print them, and I show you the picture, and you're like, oh, they're similar. One was made completely differently. One was made with, gelatin and silver nitrate on film, and then weird chemicals, and then printed, like everything in creating one image is completely different from the other, which is like a chart, a CCD screen, taking pixels, putting it into the computer, turning it into ones and zeros, then somehow printing it with laser jets or whatever. But when we look at them, they look the same. And music is very similar in that 40 years ago, a record was made by like musicians in a room with old microphones, recorded onto tape, put onto vinyl, distributed by a record company, and then listened to by someone with 2 speakers.
Yes.
And now, music can be made by like a kid on the computer, again, turns it into zeros and ones, puts it up into the cloud, someone downloads it, and they listen to it on 2 speakers for free.
Yes.
And they pay nothing. But the end result is still just that person sitting there listening to music coming out of 2 speakers. So it's all the stuff of like how music is made, how it's monetized, how it's distributed, how it's marketed, how it's perceived. All that stuff is completely changing and changed. Mm-hmm. The only thing that hasn't changed is someone sitting down listening to the piece of music.
Yes, which is the most meaningful aspect of it.
Yeah, and that's why I think like when people talk about the future of music, it's identical to the past of music. The only difference is it's going to be easier to hear music.
Yes.
You know, 50 years ago, if you wanted to hear music, you had to put on a record or listen to the radio. Those were your only choices.
Yeah.
And now we can have music anywhere. You know, like, I mean, it's strange when there's a device that doesn't play music. You know.
Yes. So, if you weren't being a musician or a photographer, what you think you would have become?
Most likely, well, I studied philosophy when I was at university, so most likely I'd be teaching philosophy at community college, because that's what the track I was on. You know, get your master's, get your PhD, and teach. Or I love psychology and neuroscience, and so I would have loved possibly to go in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
But I also really love experimental physics. I think to have, like, for example, to teach philosophy, you don't need to have any practical skills. You just need to spend a lot of time reading Kant and Heidegger.
Yes.
To study neuroscience, you have to have some practical skills, but to be an experimental theoretical physician, you actually have to have a background in very math-oriented physics, and that's not my strong suit. So,
yeah.
So one of those three things.
One of those three. And your idea, last question, your idea of perfect happiness.
Perfect happiness is eating blueberry pancakes outside with someone you love and feel comfortable around while a bunch of dogs run around.
Oh, beautiful. I love it.
And maybe Led Zeppelin's Greatest Hits playing in the background.
I love it. Thank you so much,
Oh, my
Moby. It was a
pleasure. Thanks.
pleasure talking to you. Thank you.